Back to How to AP Lang. Today we're going to be breaking down the rhetorical analysis essay. So we're going to be talking about the rhetorical analysis essay, pretty much breaking it down and talking about how you can do well, what the point system is, and at some point in another video we're going to talk about how to write one. But there are three essays on the AP language and composition exam. The first is the synthesis essay, the second is the rhetorical analysis essay, and the third is the argumentative essay. Of course, today we're talking about the second, the rhetorical analysis essay. To understand rhetoric, that's the first unit of AP language, and you can learn all about that throughout all of the units. And that's the first video on my channel, actually, so you can check that out to learn more. So the entire idea of this essay is it's broken up into 6 points. 1 point for thesis, 4 points for evidence and commentary, and 1 point for sophistication. The way this essay is going to work is you'll be given a short blurb, article, short story based on something, and you have to analyze how rhetoric and the rhetorical situation is used within the essay. So, yeah, that it's rather simple. You get the article or whatever it is. It's probably about 2 to 3 pages. Yeah, that's the very basic idea of it. In my opinion, it's one of the easier essays on the AP. But yeah. So the thesis, how do you get the point? Very simply, you respond to the prompt with a defensible thesis that analyzes the writer's rhetorical choices. Rather simple, you just argue the point. However, to not get the point, number one, you don't have a defensible thesis. The intended thesis only restates the prompt. The intended thesis provides a summary of the issue with no apparent or coherent claim. And there's a thesis, but it does not respond to the prompt. So all these are rather simple ideas. I don't think any of this is so shocking. These are all definitions taken straight from College Board, so it should be pretty self-explanatory. So what could it look like? So to get the thesis to get a point, and this is in more depth, it responds to the prompt rather than restating or rephrasing the prompt and clearly articulates a defensible thesis about the rhetorical choices the author makes. So what is that pretty much saying? It's saying, how is it overall explaining the prompt and and responding to it rather than restating it? So many theses are like, for example, if the essay is like, what is actually, I'm trying to think of a good one, but like, I'm not going to think of a good one for this specific essay, but like, the prompt, the thesis for your essay could be like, evaluate the extent to which the Ottomans expanded throughout the 14th century, and that's just like impossible anyway because they didn't exist fully at that age then. But like, that was just an AP World question. But you wouldn't just say they expanded greatly. You'd have to like you wouldn't just say they expanded to an extent. You'd say they expanded greatly, or they did not expand. Very similar here. You can't just restate the prompt or rephrase the prompt. You have to respond to it. You have to give a response. And obviously, to not get the point, you only restate the prompt. I mean, you fail to address the rhetorical choices the writer makes in the passage and describes or repeats the passage rather than making a claim that requires a defense. So I feel like this is a rather simple point. You just have to make a good thesis statement. I feel like at the time you're getting into AP Lang, you should know how to do that. Next is evidence and commentary. So there are 4 points. I'm going to go from 0 to 4. We're going to be talking about breaking it down. This is the crux of your essay. The most important thing with evidence commentary, though, is that this is where your spelling, your grammatical issues come in. Because if you have a significant amount of grammatical and spelling issues and things like that, and punctuation issues, you cannot get a 4 points. That can even also take you down to 2 points. So if you have enough issues, you won't get a 4. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's say you have all perfect writing, how is the evidence and commentary within that writing going to get you these points? So to get 0 points, you simply restate the thesis, repeats provided information, or offers information irrelevant to the prompt. So this pretty much means you're writing an essay about nothing, or you're writing an essay based on the prompt, but nothing new is given. So just a terrible essay. For 1 point, evidence provides evidence that is mostly general, and for commentary, summarizes the evidence but does not explain the evidence. Does not explain how the evidence supports the student's argument. So this is another rather simple one. It provides evidence, but it's not great evidence. It's decent evidence, and it doesn't explain the evidence. It just gives an example. It just says like the evidence is interesting. So again, I feel like this is all rather obvious. However, this is what this essay is, which is why I don't think this is actually that challenging of an essay. For 2 points, evidence provides some specific relevant evidence. Again, more specific that instead of general, you want to have evidence that is specific with claims in the lines of reasoning, things like that. And for a commentary, explains how some of the evidence relates to the student's argument, but no line of reasoning is established or the line of reasoning is faulty. So this very much means like you're giving evidence, it's good evidence. However, it's not relating back to your thesis. It's not establishing this line of reasoning. It's not benefiting your essay as much as it could be. And that's just why you get a 2. And I think a lot of students could fall into a 2 if they don't know how to further build onto their essay. And you'll see 3 has a third paragraph and it's more challenging to get than the 2. So that's something else to keep in mind, that the 2 is a very solid point. Most writers should be at a 2. And also getting a 3 is more challenging. So for a 3, it provides specific evidence to support all lines of reason claims in all lines of reasoning. So very strong evidence. Commentary explains how some of the evidence supports line of reasoning. So this means very simply that you have a good chunk of good evidence. However, you only are relating some of it back to the line of reasoning, which I don't see why you would do. But it might happen. You might forget something. And then you have to explain how at least one rhetorical point in the chat, one rhetorical choice in the passage contributes to the writer's argument, purpose, or message. So what is a rhetorical choice? We spoke about that in the first video, but how their exit, how their audience, how their writing style, how their tone, things like that, how any of those things could contribute to the writer's argument, purpose, or message. So again, I feel like that is a rather simple idea, but very challenging to execute. Because number one, some rhetorical choices are not going to be obvious. Of course, things like tone, things like, I don't know, I think like even exigence, I feel like could also be rather simple to point out. There's a ton of rhetorical choices that are simple, and there's a ton that are also very hidden. But contributing to the argument, purpose, or message, in my opinion, is easier to decipher. Once you find the rhetorical choice, it's just why are they doing it? Why are they switching tones? Well, maybe it's to strengthen their argument. Maybe it's to further show the purpose of your essay. Or maybe it's to bring the message home, bring the message more to the forefront. So you'll notice the step from 2 to 3 is very great because 3 has a much higher calling than 2. So for 4 points, evidence provides specific evidence supports all claims and lines of reasoning. So perfect evidence consistently explains how the evidence supports a line of reasoning. So perfect commentary and explains how multiple rhetorical choices in the passage contribute to the writer's argument, purpose, or message. So for 3 points, you only need one choice. For 4 points, you need multiple choices. So you'll notice from 2, 3 to 4, it's a lot more challenging to build up those points. I'll say most writers should get it too. I mentioned that before. And at the end of this video, I'll actually talk about where you should be if you're what level of writing you're at. Getting a 3 is also a little bit more challenging. Getting a 4 is very challenging. Getting a 4 out of 4 on evidence and commentary means you have to have multiple rhetorical choices, great evidence, great commentary. That's something many people are not going to be able to do. Many people are going to fall into that 3-point category, or the things in their 3-point category, those rhetorical choices might not be good enough, and you might fall back to a 2. So it's always something very risky, but something to keep in mind is that these tests are timed. You only have a certain amount of time to write this essay. So even though you might be able to write this essay in 2 hours, if you have a lot less time to write this rhetorical analysis essay, maybe you're not able to completely knock out every bullet point for 4 points. Maybe you could in 5 hours, but maybe you can't on the time on the test, plus the stress of the test in the first place. So it's always something to keep in mind, and something to keep in mind when you're preparing for it. So to get a 4 on evidence and commentary, I'm not going to go through how to get like a 0 on evidence and commentary. I'm just going to go into 4 to just show what the highest level is. So you have to uniformly offer evidence to support the claims, focus on the importance of specific words and details from the passage to build an argument. That's an important one. So I think the first one's rather obvious, but like to use specific words and details. This means sometimes taking quotes. This means mentioning specific things from the document. It's not just saying, he mentions this idea and this idea is something like this. Like you have to really take specific pieces of it because that's what builds the puzzle. Organize and support an argument as a line of reasoning composed of multiple supporting claims, each with adequate evidence that is clearly explained. This is another important one, using the line of reasoning to support your having an argument, organize and support an argument as a line of reasoning That's what I was trying to say. Compose of multiple supporting claims. Have multiple ideas supporting your biggest idea, your biggest thesis. Do not just have your thesis built on one evidence. Have a lot of different pillars of evidence supporting your thesis. Like if you don't, then it's going to come crumbling down. And explain how the writer's use of rhetorical choices contributes to the student's interpretation of the passage. That's another important one. How are they using rhetorical choices? That's that final paragraph in that 4 point column over there. However, the challenge with that is you might not be great at pointing out those choices and you don't have that much time to take the test. So let's talk about the final point, the most challenging point, sophistication. This is one point. To get the point, you demonstrate sophistication of thought and or complex understanding of the rhetorical situation. And to not get the point, it does not meet that criteria. So this is very similar to the complexity point on many of these social studies AP exams. And very similarly, this means that you're doing something that isn't that is more complex. And to not get that point, that means you're not doing something that isn't shocking. You're to get this point, you have to do something that's new, something that AP readers aren't seeing every person do. You could play your essay very safe and just do things that are like rather obvious. Oh, this rhetorical choice is the most common one. I bet everyone's doing this one, but at least they'll get that point. So maybe you play it safe and get a 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 on evidence and commentary, but by playing it safe, you're probably not going to get sophistication. So sophistication is a very challenging point to get. You're most likely not going to get a sophistication unless you get a 3 or 4 on commentary. And sophistication also means like showing more interesting ideas. Maybe this means writing an essay on a higher level than the AP level by not just writing an essay based on the template that you can write any rhetorical essay on, but really writing some complex essays with some complex ideas. So sophistication is very challenging to get unless you're a strong writer. You're most likely not going to get sophistication. I would say don't aim for sophistication unless you know you can get it or you have a strategy to get it. And to get the point, let's talk about it. Explaining the significance or relevance of the writer's rhetorical situation, explaining a purpose or function of the passage's complexities or tensions, employing a writing style that is consistently vivid and persuasive. So this is very important actually. Explaining the significance or relevance of the writer's rhetorical situation. That's just explaining background, explaining other ideas to really drive it home. The second bullet point, why is it written the way it is? Why is it structured? Why is it complex? And employing a style that is consistently vivid and persuasive. This is something that comes from just being a good writer. If you're a good writer that writes interesting and vivid essays, you're probably going to get that final bullet point for sophistication. However, if you don't have a distinct writing style, if your essays are commonly boring, you're not going to be able to work towards that unless you really put effort in. Now, it's really talking about what not to do to get the point. So, attempts to contextualize the text. Such as attempts consist predominantly of sweeping generalizations in a world where, since the beginning of time, this means you have to be specific, talk about the text, not generalizing. Only hints at or suggest other arguments, while some may argue at, or some people say, dive into other arguments. If you're going to give a counter argument, fully dive into it. Examine individual rhetorical choices, but do not examine relationships among different choices throughout the text. This means saying this is a rhetorical choice, this is a rhetorical choice, but how do they connect? How is that built together? Oversimplifying complexities of the text. That's another bad thing. You don't want to be like, oh, this is a rather simple idea, even though it's complex. Like, you want to explain the complexity. You want to dive into it. You don't want to try to simplify it. You don't want to try to lower your own quality. And use complicated or complex sentences or language that is ineffective because it does not enhance their analysis. So this just means not writing that is over complexity, trying to over explain ideas that does not enhance your essay. Like over explain, like explaining using 5 sentences to explain something that you couldn't do. Again, sophistication is a very challenging point to get. I'd say sophistication is really only going to come to you if you're really working hard on this essay, if you're already a good writer, or if you can write quickly. If those things aren't you and you're already struggling with AP Lang, this is going to be a very challenging essay to get the sophistication point on. So that is everything, all the 6 points you can get on the rhetorical analysis essay. So if you're a student and you are let's talk about what level you are and what you could get on the AP. Of course, someone on a low level could get a 6, someone on a high level could get a 0. However, what should you be getting? If you're a low level, I'm guessing you should aim for like a 2 or a 3. The thesis should be almost guaranteed, and you should get 1 or 2 points on the evidence and commentary section. If you're about a medium writer, I'd say you should aim for a 4. I'd say a 4 or 5. I'd say you should definitely get that thesis, and you should try to get a 3 or 4 on evidence and commentary. If you know how to write, if you're a decent writer, I think you can get that 3 or 4 on evidence and commentary as long as you know how to talk about rhetorical choices. If you're a high level writer, I think you should aim for a 5 or 6. Of course, sophistication is a challenging point to get, but it's not impossible. And to get sophistication, very simply, you just have to know which of those bullets you want to go for. If there's 3 bullets to get sophistication, pick one that you want. Explain the purpose or function of passages, complexities, or tensions. If that's what you want to aim for, practice that. Don't practice all 3 ways to get sophistication. Practice one, and then you could get the point. And of course, avoid all the pitfalls. So that is breaking down the rhetorical analysis essay. In a later video, I'm definitely going to break down a real essay, talk about that. That's mostly likely going to come once the College Board releases their commentary on the 2025 essays, but that hasn't happened yet. Aside from that, this is all from How to AP Lang on breaking down the rhetorical analysis essay. And see you guys in the next one.